Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a really specific, kind of mind-bending worldview. We're going to unpack the teachings and writings from a philosophical text called How Far You Are from Heaven. This was written by Xu Feng, who's known as the Guide of Life Chenyuan. Our goal today is to just objectively explore the exact framework he lays out in this source material. We're going to look at how this text defines a perfect utopia, the psychological barriers that keep us humans from getting there, and the very specific steps it claims will close that massive gap. It's a genuinely compelling thought experiment, so let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Xu Feng opens the whole thing with an incredibly provocative question. He asks, do you believe that there is a place in the universe where everyone loves each other and where people never quarrel or fight? Now, the text doesn't ask this as some abstract hypothetical. It immediately challenges you to consider if a literal heaven could exist. Not in an afterlife, but as a physical reality right now. It's an incredibly bold hook, and it sets the stage for everything that follows.
Section 1. The perfect utopia. Because to figure out the distance to heaven, we first need to know what this heaven actually looks like according to Life Chenyuan. Let's explore this vision of what they call the second home.
And this brilliantly illustrates the divide. Xu Feng draws a stark contrast between our normal, everyday world and his utopian ideal. Traditional society is built on pillars you're very familiar with: marriage, the nuclear family, currency, personal property. But according to the text, these aren't foundations to be proud of. They're actually burdens. The Life Chenyuan alternative, this second home, operates totally differently. Those traditional structures, completely gone. Instead, the text describes a society of free love, free labor, absolutely zero money, and a harmonious coexistence where nobody has to manage or monitor anyone else. The source literally says no one would pocket anything found on the ground, and doors are not bolted at night.
Building on that, the text explicitly claims this is not just a pipe dream. It's described as a literal Xanadu on Earth, where people just don't worry about the fundamental anxieties of aging, sickness, or death. Imagine that. Xu Feng writes that this new oasis for life is absolutely real, located right here on Earth, serving as a place where humanity and nature coexist without harming each other. In fact, the framework insists that some followers, they're called Chenyuan Celestials, have already seen the misty scenery of this heaven because they're getting so close to it.
Section 2. Measuring the distance. So this brings us to the central metaphor of the entire text. If this perfect Xanadu really exists right here on Earth, why can't the rest of us see it? How far away are we?
108,000 kilometers. Now, in Chinese culture, 108,000 kilometers is a famous proverb. It's used to describe a distance that is just unimaginably tremendous. The text uses this exact cultural touchstone to help us visualize the spiritual and psychological gap between humanity and utopia. Specifically, Xu Feng writes that if you never save wealth in heaven, you are 108,000 kilometers away from it. It's a really striking way to visualize spiritual misalignment, right?
So what are the worldly beliefs that actually push us hundreds of thousands of kilometers away? Well, the source lays out some very clear distance markers. First, there's a huge theological barrier. The text states that if you believe you were made by your parents rather than the greatest creator, you are endlessly far from heaven. Second, it points to unpaid debts from past lives as this heavy tether keeping you stuck. And third are societal attachments. If you believe that owning money, power, and fame, or even prioritizing traditional marriage and family are the biggest forms of wealth in life, the text argues you're actively keeping yourself miles away from this utopia.
Section 3. Weeds of the soul. But wait, the distance isn't just measured by external beliefs or society. It's deeply internal too. And that leads us to a vivid metaphor used in the source material, your soul garden.
Now, what's really interesting about this is just how comprehensive this list of psychological barriers is. Xu Feng describes these traits not just as minor character flaws, but as literal poisonous weeds growing in your soul garden. We're talking about jealousy, complaining, anger, possession, control, hypocrisy, selfishness, greed, pride, and laziness. The text even throws in comparison, meanness, cruelty, extravagance, and waste. The absolutely crucial point here is the heavy burden of these negative traits. As long as these weeds are allowed to take root and grow in your mind, the text argues entry to the second home is just impossible. You remain entirely too far from heaven.
Actually, it's not just about the bad weeds taking over, it's also about what's missing. The teachings emphasize that a massive gap is created if you never know what confession or apology are, or if you simply lack a heart of gratitude. Add to that coveting your own personal property, which acts like a giant anchor weighing you down. Without these vital practices of gratitude and release, you are actively maintaining that vast
108,000-kilometer distance between yourself and utopia. Section 4. Steps towards heaven. Okay, so we've explored the utopian vision, and we've mapped out the immense distance created by our worldly attachments and emotional weeds. Now, let's shift to the final phase of our explainer. How does the source material suggest we can actually close this massive gap?
Let's move to the solution and see how this builds. The text lays out a logical, three-step progression for shedding all these earthly burdens. Step 1. It's all about releasing attachments, letting go of personal property and what the text calls small group love. That means you have to stop focusing your love exclusively on your immediate family or a tiny social circle and start loving universally. Step 2 focuses on behavior. You have to completely stop trying to control or hamper anyone else's freedom, and you've got to stop complaining or telling sad stories to people. Finally, step 3 is the ultimate transformation, returning to a completely childlike state. According to Xu Feng, if you can ditch these burdens and reach that pure state of innocence, you are suddenly just one step away from heaven.
And that brings us to Xu Feng's final challenge. He absolutely knows people are going to be skeptical, but he offers this simple response. The text says, "Why can you not see the scenery of heaven? Because you are too far from it. If you try to get close to heaven, step by step, the scenery will become clearer. Eventually you will see heaven. Just have a try if you do not believe me." It's such a fascinating way to wrap up the teachings. He frames this spiritual change not as some rigid, dogmatic command, but as a practical, real-world experiment. By shedding societal norms and pulling those psychological weeds, the text promises the impossible distance will shrink and utopia will reveal itself. So it leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder. If letting go of our attachments is the only way to shorten the distance to heaven, what are you holding on to right now? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.